The vaccine we're developing is a partnership with Arcturus Therapeutics, which is based in San Diego.
We call the vaccine Lunar COVID-19.
This is a vaccine candidate from Arcturus. I'm preparing them now to deliver into the animals to test for the immune responses.
We needed to shrink this 10 to 15-year process into literally a year.
Right now, in Singapore, we hope to start human clinical trial.
You need to show that the vaccine is safe and that it has a chance of working.
This vaccine is a new vaccine, which means that it has never been tested in humans before.
If it's successful, then we have a vaccine. If not, then we don't.
Melbourne has begun a 6-week total lockdown.
Malaysia has extended its recovery movement control.
COVID-19 has re-emerged in Vietnam after 3 months.
The number of new infections over 5 days passes 1,000 in Seoul and surrounding areas.
The scientists working in the space of emerging infectious diseases, we often refer to outbreaks as a war because it's fighting an invisible enemy, and I personally think it's quite apt.
Millions and millions of people have already been infected, and there's no sign that this thing's going to stop. So we're going to need vaccines. The whole world will need it.
After months and months of hard work, it's finally led to this point where the first batch of human samples have come into the lab. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be separating the blood from the ribonucleic acid, then use it to measure the immune gene expression later. My job is to measure gene expression, and it's a relatively new tool when it comes to assessing vaccine safety and efficacy. When a vaccine is given, sometimes it can lead to side effects such as maybe headaches, maybe a stomach ache, a rash. In the past, you wouldn't be able to pinpoint exactly why it happened. But with the use of molecular tools like what we are using for gene expression work, it allows you to identify already at a very early stage which genes are switched on and off, and pinpoint what are the driving factors behind the side effects that are seen. With that, you are able to complete the trial in a shorter amount of time, involving less patients. So after all that work, what we now have is the ribonucleic acid, or the genomic material that we've extracted from the blood of the vaccine recipients. With this, we'll be able to look at the response to the vaccine. Actually, the shortened timeline doesn't mean that any corners were cut. The idea is to be able to do this fast, but also effectively.
So right now we're entering into a BSL-3 facility, which is a high containment facility for infectious diseases. So human trials are going full force ahead. Today we just gotten the samples from the patients that were vaccinated with the trial vaccine. We have taken the samples into the lab, and what we'll be doing is we'll add virus to the samples. This will tell us whether or not a protective immune response has been mounted in these patients that have been vaccinated with our trial vaccine. So in a separate lab, we vaccinate animals, and then we test whether the vaccine protects against the virus in these animal models. So in the BSL-3, safety is paramount. Because of all the gear that you have to wear, what would take 10 minutes in a normal laboratory takes half an hour over there. So even simple things become difficult things. But after a while, you learn to work fast, slowly. When we were planning the experiments to start in June or July, we were very aware that we had to be done by a very specific date, which was in November. So in November, what basically happens is that the entire lab was shut down so that MOH, SCDF, everyone can come in to do their audits to ensure that the facility is safe. If it wasn't a pandemic, we would leave some stuff to after the shutdown. We would come again, we'll start again next year. But for now, the world needs a vaccine. We need to produce one. No matter how hard we have to work, everything has to be done by November.
So right now we are loading the cartridge. This is actually the last step in our workflow. This is actually the first time the team is working on an mRNA vaccine, so it's uncharted territory also for us. This is like the first look at the gene expression data from the trial. Within the team, when each of us, we get a new set of data, we always kind of like text each other or like share a screenshot of what we've seen, and then like everyone else is like, wow, new data. In the next few months, we will get more and more samples arriving, and we'll really need to have all hands on deck for that. At least with the case numbers that have come down and finally also being out of circuit breaker period, it's a bit easier for us to work.
So sitting in the third quarter of 2020, it feels like the absolute worst of the crisis may well be behind us. We don't know when the vaccine is coming, but with mask wearing, social distancing, contact tracing, some countries at least have a pretty good sense of how to deal with the disease. So fingers crossed, but it seemed that things were not as bad as they were in April, May.
My name is Amy John. I'm a nurse clinician in NCID. This ward is a contingency ward, 20-bedded single rooms. During the peak period, this whole area was filled up, like 100% filled with patients. Now we had closed few wards. That is a good sign.
NCID is built to be able to handle a medium-sized kind of outbreak, where our maximum capacity over here is 300, and we can scale it up to about 500 plus. So obviously, COVID-19 during the period of March and April completely overwhelmed NCID's capacity to be able to handle so many number of cases.
The peak of the pandemic with the migrant worker dormitories getting affected, just the sheer volume of patients was a real challenge. You're dealing with a lot of different languages and cultures, learning to say, do you have a fever? Do you have a cough? Are you feeling short of breath? In Bengali, in Tamil. It's really very challenging.
This is our main nurses station, all working very hard. NCID is not easy to work in. Every day is challenging. The main things about the staff is that they had exhaustions, stress, fatigue, because it's a peak pandemic. And keeping in mind, they have their family in other countries, and their family is also in a lockdown, and still they're focused on the patients here.
It was all hands on deck. National Centre for Infectious Disease had very able support from lots and lots of people. Unstinting support from Tan Tock Seng Hospital and colleagues who would just come in and volunteer. Morning, guys. Morning, sister. You can see when you're sort of past the hump. And it's a little bit like, you know, when the rain falls and it's pouring cats and dogs. It's a little bit of a gradual thing when you realize, like, you know, the rain is letting up and you're not getting pelted quite as heavily. Morning, Mr. Tan. How are you doing today? When we start to look at the numbers coming down, that probably happened somewhere around June, July, when they lifted the lockdown. We went out for our first roti prata in a food court. That was wonderful.
Even if everyone thinks the worst is over, here we still stay vigilant. We are not complacent.
Okay, what do we have for patients today? Steroids, yeah. We are still seeing imported cases, and if not everyone in the world has access to vaccine, or even within the country, if not everyone takes up the vaccine, it could result in transmission, so we have to remain vigilant.
Whether vaccines will put us back into the pre-COVID era, I think is subject to a lot of uncertainty at this point in time. We're all very hopeful that one of these days we will have a good, effective, safe, cheap, easy-to-use vaccine. In the meantime, we still have to live with the virus. We have to put in all the preventive measures as much as we can so that we can minimize the impact.
these are the samples that we received from the human trials today.
It's a little bit more peaceful now. The positive cases we are getting are mainly from imported cases. But for those who are working to try to find either an effective vaccine or an effective treatment for COVID-19, the war continues.
As we go to September, it's really ramping up very fast. October, it gets even worse. We have samples coming in on Christmas Eve. Our BSL-3 colleagues have data due on Christmas.
When we started the trial, right, we would have several weeks planned ahead of time. And as we went on, we realized, oh, they're adding more participants into a certain dose. Oh no, it's not 5 people per cohort, it's now 10, 12. So then we scrambled to sort of fit everything in to the same timeline.
This is experiment layout for today. We are processing these batch of samples from the volunteers after they receive the vaccine. So what I'm adding now is actually a reagent that will help the machine to detect the antibodies in the volunteer serum.
Sometimes it does feel tedious doing the same assay over and over again for different samples. For me personally, as the clinical trial progresses, the analysis gets more and more interesting.
So the run is done, and I will send the data to Rookie for analysis.
So we just got some very exciting data that came in, and here I can show you what we are seeing. Orange and the red lines here and the green, these are from the trial volunteers. Majority of them, there's still not an antibody response because it's too early. But you can see, even as early as this, there's one individual who's producing a response. So this is very encouraging results. Personally, to see something go from design to people to licensure, that means a lot to a scientist. Do I think of this as a dilemma, this great opportunity that the pandemic has offered me? However, there's a lot of people dying, right? I see this as, I'm an infectious disease scientist, right? The reason I trained for this many years is probably for this. There's no better purpose, probably, than what I can do at this moment.
British drug maker AstraZeneca and Oxford University have paused the trials after a volunteer fell ill.
Trials being halted for severe adverse events is not unheard of. It's quite common, actually. So if you develop appendicitis and go for surgery, that's a severe adverse event. You cross the road, you weren't careful, and you got knocked down by a car, that's a severe adverse event. Completely unrelated to the vaccine, but it happens. And if the monitoring board feels that, hey, wait, I want to take a look and make sure that this is not because of a vaccine, then once they're satisfied that it's safe, they can restart.
We are glad that the halts happen, because it ensures that something safe gets to the people. Scientists understand that. I think for laymen, because they're not used to vaccine trials, they probably got a bit shocked.
There will be no such thing as a vaccine with no side effects. For instance, a funny taste in the mouth, the fever, it's all the function of your immune response. People who receive vaccine must know that side effects are part and parcel of the immune response, learning how to recognize a new virus. In terms of the vaccine safety, I think vaccines can be developed to be very safe and well tolerated.
This is the administration building of the first infectious disease hospital, Middleton Hospital. It was built in 1903 to cater for the 3 most infectious diseases. Smallpox right at the back, and then there was plague to the left and cholera to the right. Well, these were built for the SARS, when we had the SARS epidemic.
The concept of vaccination has been in Singapore for a very long time. As early as 1819, the British forces that came here had started the vaccination. So you have those vaccines available But I'm not so sure it was effective because I'm not so sure they can enforce it among the Asians and the masses. It was only after we got independence from 1965 and you actually saw the decline. We had a National Childhood Immunization Program, the NCIP. It was made compulsory for certain diseases. Before a child was able to attend school, they have to show proof that they had been vaccinated. It was an all-out campaign, that was reinforced by education with the enforcement of the laws. The immunization rates in Singapore were way above 90%. You can see a very dramatic decline of the infectious diseases, and it all went down, to almost zero. So I think our national immunization programs were very, very effective. But there's increasingly in many parts of the world a group of educated young professionals, what we call the anti-vaccination group, or the anti-vaxxers, who for reasons of expressing human rights and freedom would also be opposing it.
Jika saya letak nama Muhammad Zaki, jadi saya boleh tahulah selama ni saya tulis berapa banyak artikel dalam MKT itu sendiri. MKT adalah singkatan kepada masyarakat kena tahu. Jadi masyarakat kena tahu sekarang ni dah mencecah hampir 50,000 orang ibu bapa yang concern tentang vaksin. Macam mana saya, peringkat awalnya saya belum anti vaksin. Hingga pada satu peringkat yang mana anak saya sentiasa jatuh sakit. Isteri dia rasa setiap kali suntik vaksin anak jadi sakit. So di situ dia mencadangkan mungkin kita kena stop dulu. Kita tolak vaksin dulu. And then dari segi cara rawatan, kalau anak jatuh sakit kita akan guna natural remedies. Masa tu saya sebagai orang yang pro pada sains, saya pun macam benda ni boleh berkesan ke? And then yang the amazing thing adalah after 12 jam saya tengok anak saya walaupun dia masih panas tapi dia boleh buka mata dia and then sit around, try to communicate. Nanti petang kita main memanah tau. Dari situ saya mula study apa itu vaksin. Sebab saya memang tak tahu apa, zero. Di Malaysia bahan bacaan macam tu tak ada. Saya masih dalam peringkat mengkaji mRNA dalam sudut, bukan kita memikirkan sudut negatif tentang vaksin ini. Bila start isu COVID-19, sebab saya bekerja di Singapura, tinggal di sana untuk beberapa sebelum pulang di Malaysia. Jika ada vaksin, adakah saya akan ambil vaksin COVID ni? Jika tiada pilihan, saya akan memilih vaksin yang mana paling rendah risiko yang saya boleh tanggung. Dan sebagai satu langkah terakhir, jika tiada pilihan, saya mungkin terpaksa menimbangkan untuk tidak lagi bekerja di Singapura.
You may have to censor me because I really hate anti-vaxxers. The way the vaccine works, there's a minimum number of people in the population that need to be vaccinated and protected so that the vaccine can provide immunity to everyone. Anti-vaxxers who refuse to take the vaccine, frankly, they're putting the people around them in danger.
The reasons for vaccine hesitancy are very complex. So most often they are based on misinformation and multiple sources of not correct, inaccurate information. I just started Qigong. The median age is 75 years of age in the park. And the lady tells me, oh, the vaccine is not safe. So, yeah, how do you explain it to them? So they must have picked it up somewhere. So WHO, governments, we are not only fighting a pandemic, but we are also fighting an infodemic of wrong and misinformation.
About 20 years ago, there were some adverse reports that vaccination led to autism. Of course, it was proven wrong. Our science and the evidence have shown. But these are basically for the anti-vaxxers.
My father was a very stoic person. The one time that I saw him and remember his face where he was afraid was when I had measles. I was born at a time when measles vaccine wasn't available. And I remember the scene where he carried me into the clinic because I was too sick to walk. So this is not a trivial disease, and it's entirely preventable. So I'm frustrated that because of this falsehood that the vaccine can cause autism, children are unnecessarily dying of measles. But having said that, I think there's also an imperative on the field of medicine that we need to be very credible. Where we don't know, we need to say we don't know. At the end of the day, for this to work, there has to be trust.
The onus is on the scientists to be very transparent. Can we do a better job communicating science? Of course, I think we're terrible at it. I think scientists make things too complicated.
So here's the latest COVID Chronicles. This particular cartoon is the first in the new series, really focusing on vaccines. I was in a briefing at NUH, which included some of the senior health officials, including Minister Garn. This is right back in January 2020. And he suggested that he would like me to get more involved in community messaging. Coincidentally, at the time, NUS was planning a comic strip series. And by the end of the next day, I was a cartoon character.
I'm Andrew, the artist for the COVID-19 Chronicles. Right now, I'm just adding some colors to the final artwork. Okay, all done. Now I'm going to send this off to Dale.
The way these happen, we start with the idea and discuss it. We get a black and white drawing, and then once we've agreed on all the wording, Andrew does the colouring and sends it round for a final review. This particular one has got rabbits and Shifu masters and things like this, and this is very typical with Andrew. He's got an imagination beyond people like me. You have to address vaccine hesitancy, but you have to address it in terms of the fact that these are normal people, they're educated people, they're friends, family, colleagues. Those people aren't doing anything wrong, they just want to understand better.
The development of the vaccine for COVID is so rushed because of the urgency of it. And so some people will be very skeptical, about being the guinea pigs to try this out. So I think the greater the evidence and proof there is available will overcome some of the resistance.
So today, Saturday morning, we're going for a hike with my friends to sort of relax and chill.
Recently, there are a lot of studies being done about burnouts, and especially during COVID, because everyone's really working to the max. And I recognize that I need something else. So now when I come home, a lot of times I call my husband and sort of relax this way. I make an effort to visit my friends, to have some sort of plans every weekend, whether it's hiking, walk through Kentridge, whatever we want, we do it.
Unforgettable experience for them.
Whenever they take the bag.
The wedding's in a few weeks' time. We are preparing the doggies for the church wedding itself. During the busiest period of the vaccine development, we ran almost 12-hour days every day, and it was 7 days a week. I barely got any time to think about anything else other than the vaccine work itself. Do I get too caught up in work? Yes. But it's not just me. I think the whole team does the same thing. The work comes first, you finish the work, and then you take care of yourself.
The preparation for our wedding has been tough.
I think I was relatively distracted most of the time. I think how supportive my fiancé is. He'll just plan around my work schedule, as though my work has become the priority in both our lives.
Sometimes it does get to my head, thinking about whatever she's doing at work and whether she is more involved in that rather than the wedding preparation. Of course, as a boyfriend, I signed up for it.
Both of us are big Man U fans. That's actually how we met, by watching a Man U game together in the pub.
The amount of hours that she put into it sometimes doesn't really register to the layperson, you know. Most of the time we see the frontline people and their dedication to the patients, but I think we should recognize the effort that the back-end people have put through during this season.
The president is now at the Walter Reed National Military and Medical Center and is expected to stay at the military hospital for the next few days. In his treatment, President Trump has begun taking the antiviral drug remdesivir.
Remdesivir was initially explored as treatment for Ebola, MERS, and SARS. Given the similarity of SARS-CoV-2 to these viruses, Gilead quickly repurposed our research to study remdesivir's safety and efficacy in treating COVID-19. In Singapore, remdesivir was approved by the Health Sciences Authority in June 2020 to treat patients with severe COVID-19.
I'm just doing a quick stock check. We have additional inventory of remdesivir from US today.
Vaccines are only one of the key strategies to address the pandemic. It is equally important to continue research and development of treatments to ensure that we have all the tools not only to stop the spread of the virus, but also treat those who have been infected.
There certainly has been a lot of talk about treatments, about whether it's remdesivir, hydroxychloroquine, dexamethasone in managing more severely ill people. And there's still certainly plenty of research happening with treatments, but obviously now the vaccines are coming out. The focus turns to vaccines.
There's a reason why in the past we've seen large pharmaceuticals not being very excited about participating in vaccine development. Very expensive, a lot of upfront cost. By the time you develop the vaccine, will there be that much urgency for it in any case? Now, 2020 is a very different picture. The governments around the world have put in almost $10 billion in supporting vaccine development. Philanthropies have come up with another couple of billion. There was a global imperative to spend a great deal of research and development resources to come up with vaccines as quickly as possible.
Well, one thing is to have a vaccine, and the other thing is to get the vaccine into the people. If you would like to interrupt transmission, you may need up to 70% of your population vaccinated. That's a massive undertaking. That's 70% of the world population. Has never happened before.
The first two vaccines against COVID-19 by Pfizer and Moderna requires a temperature of -70. The second one was also freezing point, which will mean that if you don't have the refrigeration facilities, the people in the rural areas, in the hot countries, in the poorer countries will not be able to benefit.
Since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, Singapore Airlines has played a key role in transporting critical pharmaceutical shipments to areas of need.
This is SQ7321. On board, we have pharmaceutical cargo coming in from Amsterdam, connecting to Sydney. We have to ensure that the temperature is constantly controlled throughout the connection time. The silver thing that is covering the shipment is actually the thermal blanket that helps to retain its temperature and prevent the shipment being exposed to the outside tarmac temperature.
Besides fulfilling the role of transporting vaccines to Singapore, we'll also step up our role to transport vaccines to countries in Asia and Australia and New Zealand. When the COVID-19 vaccine becomes available, just imagine the number of doses each country requires. It's going to be a Herculean task.
This is set school port. So the cargo shipment that you saw earlier coming from the plane is being brought here for storage within a cold chain handling facility.
Based on news reports we've seen, there's been a wide range of vaccines in development from -80 degrees to 2 to 8 or 8 to 15 degrees. It's critical that we maintain these vaccines within the prescribed temperature ranges, as not doing so will render these vaccines ineffective.
So all these shipments is going to be loaded on a plane to Sydney tomorrow.
Planning and preparation is key to handle the availability of vaccine that's expected in 2021. We envisage that there will be a huge increase in demand for cold chain solutions.
My name is Roger Chiu. I'm the founder of SFS Pharma Logistics. My role is to transport the vaccines from the cold port to the storage hub. Then we will prepare to do the last mile of the vaccines to the respective vaccination centers. So what Song Seng is doing is pouring dries into the box to keep the serum frozen at -80. When the vaccine becomes available, the last mile is very critical. How do we ensure that vaccines kept at the correct temperature to the distribution sites? Take Philippines, for example. It's a country with a population of 100 million, 7,000 islands throughout the whole entire country. That will be a big logistics nightmare because we have different suppliers at different temperature ranges. Some of the vaccines requires 2 dosage, meaning when you take the first dosage, you need the second dosage, for example, about 28 days later. Logistics to plan to deliver these vaccines needs to be very precise, super complex, so that the one that received the first dosage receive the second dosage on time. Otherwise, the whole exercise is wasted. This is where we prepare our -20 cool box. At this stage of the game, we have no clue what temperature ranges to prepare, so we actually kept 1,000 boxes of each temperature ranges. It's a huge investment, and it's investment that we are ready to make as for the good of Singapore and for the world.
We are not in a fog of information war, right? We don't have the information at hand right now to plan. We're doing what we can to upskill, to upgrade our knowledge to handle the COVID-19 vaccine that is expected in 2021.
The vaccine is shipped to us by Arcturus from the United States. And it basically comes at -80 degrees Celsius. Once we thaw them, we have about 6 hours to do everything we need to do before they become rendered probably not so useful anymore.
One of the important aspects of the Arcturus vaccine candidate is that it's a lyophilized vaccine. The process of lyophilization means the water's removed, and then it's distributed as a powder in a vial. So if you see on the very bottom of that, that's the dried vaccine. Very tiny amount, and then you rehydrate it prior to injection. But this isn't the real vaccine. This is just some practice runs. So this is the process of concentrating the vaccine candidate. It goes through what's called a diafiltration process to remove the water. The lyophilized vaccine product can be taken out of a fridge or a freezer and put back in if you don't use it. So there's benefits for handling. There's no dry ice handling. There's no extraordinarily cold freezers that are required for a vaccine product like this. It allows us to access more areas, rural areas where people don't have access to electricity. This will be very important.
Every human being can be affected by the virus. And we do want to have vaccines to be able to protect everybody, regardless of where this person resides.
No country will be safe if not all countries are safe. Cold chain will be a major logistic hurdle at the moment. And that's why also we need more vaccines to come forward and also more research to go on how to preserve the vaccines.
Yesterday, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine actually arrived in Singapore. So we can start vaccinating the Singapore population very soon. But for us, our work still continues, and hopefully we can get out another vaccine to help ease this pandemic.
Finally, I think things have started to wind down a little bit. More people going on leave, I guess, because it's end of the year mood. We're also getting ready for work that's starting in January. So we're all just kind of like hanging in there for now. The good news is we've had a good safety profile with the vaccine, and in the majority of participants, we've seen a good immune response as well, which gives us the encouragement to move on to the next phase of testing.
We've just wrapped up the phase 1/2 of the clinical trial, and right now I'm preparing the ethics submission for the upcoming phase 2/3 study to be submitted before the end of the month. I'm making my way to attend a Zoom meeting to discuss the logistics for the upcoming phase 2/3 study. The trial has been running very smoothly, and there has been no major safety concerns. And in the meantime, the analysis is also underway.
So we're looking at lung tissues of animals that were infected with SARS-CoV-2, but they were vaccinated priorhand. So we're trying to determine whether the lungs themselves were protected from any kind of damage from the virus that we couldn't see. This empty space over here suggests that the lungs are relatively healthy, because if this was a damaged lung, you would see this all here packed with white blood cells. So the BSL-3 has just been shut for the audit, and we're done for the year, I guess. We worked all the way till the last day that we were able to work, and it was stressful, to say the least. We managed to do the last experiment, transfer out as much as we can before the shutdown happened.
I was in the first batch of healthcare workers at NCID who got vaccinated on the 30th of December 2020. The second shot for the COVID vaccine will be due 3 weeks after the first one. So we're looking forward to completing our vaccination. Hello, Mr. Tan, how are you? We're glad to do this because we have been seeing COVID patients without protection from vaccination, just from the PPE, for the past 12 months. It's normal to have some degree of vaccine hesitancy, so we want to overcome the hesitancy by providing good information and doing this cautiously so that the public are confident that vaccine safety is one of our top priorities.
Because we work with a live virus, we've been given priority to take the vaccine with all the healthcare workers as well. People like my mom who will take the vaccine, I think right now she'll be thinking about the side effects, which may or may not come. But actually what's going on in my mind is what's my transcriptomic response happening in my cells, which cells are homing to the immune site, and in a month's time, how high will my antibody titers be? It's not just a job hazard, but it's knowing what's happening in your immune system, and I think that's pretty cool.
When Moderna and Pfizer reported they were going in for quick licensure, for us who've been working for a whole year on a different vaccine, it's a bit disappointing. But in terms of the whole world, we were quite excited to have a vaccine come out and licensed. One thing that we did realize is that having licensed vaccines available on the market makes it very difficult for other vaccines to then enter the market.
Once you have a licensed vaccine, that would force us to think about how to restructure our phase 3 trials. Conventionally, a phase 3 trial is where you compare the vaccine with another group that got placebo, but it doesn't make sense now because ethically it's not right to give people placebo when there is a licensed vaccine.
You cannot deny the participants this vaccine. So then you can no longer compare your vaccine that is still in development against a placebo.
Those are the complications that the newer vaccines will face. One solution to that is if we can identify the immune responses that are necessary to protect against COVID-19, for instance, a certain kind of antibodies or T cells, then all the new vaccines need to do is to show that those vaccinated with those new vaccines can produce this kind of immune responses that are associated with protection. right? So the whole thing is called correlates of protection. So the correlates of protection pathway could be a way for all new vaccines, including the one that we're developing with Arcturus, to get into licensing, and therefore then bypass the need for a large phase 3 trial.
An alternative is a human challenge trial. That is where you can give an individual the vaccine and infect that individual with the SARS-2 coronavirus. And in this, you can directly figure out if your vaccine is protecting or not.
In the UK, we're planning on starting the first human infection challenge with SARS-CoV-2 very shortly. And this will be a collaboration between Imperial College London, hVivo, and the Royal Free Hospital, coordinated by the Vaccines Task Force. So with the first generation of COVID vaccines, it took about 10 months. But going forward, it's not going to be possible to do those studies as quickly because the cases of natural COVID-19 are going down. And so you will need to recruit a lot more people. Whereas in a human challenge study, we only need very few numbers of participants to be able to show an effect. So that means that these studies can be done much more quickly, and the interpretation of the results is also much more straightforward.
I'm Alistair, I'm 18 years old, I'm in the UK, and I volunteered to be exposed to coronavirus in human challenge trials. I'm at the point where I've been screened for a trial. I had lung checks, I had an ECG, I had all kinds of things. As long as they come back all good, I should be okay to be on a trial. Challenge trials are inherently very, very dangerous. Hell yeah, I'm afraid. I think everyone should be. But if I didn't do it, it would weigh on my conscience because I genuinely believe that challenge trials have the power to save a lot of lives.
We start off with the lowest possible dose that we can, and that's mainly for safety reasons. If that first very low dose is enough to cause infection, then the study would probably be done in 2 to 3 months.
So Britain has access to vaccines, but that's Britain. We are one of the richest countries in the world. But that's simply not the case the world over. The world desperately needs access to more vaccines, and the world desperately needs access to better vaccine technology. And without challenge trials, we risk losing access to these vaccines right when they're most useful.
Not only does this me-first approach leave the world's poorest and most vulnerable people at risk, it's also self-defeating.
Vaccine nationalism is the idea that make sure that our people are inoculated, our people get the vaccine first, then after that, look at the needs beyond our shores. So in a sense, I think vaccine nationalism is understandable because the responsibility of governments are first and foremost to their own people. What is important is to bear in mind the need to cooperate with each other. After all, this is a global health pandemic.
And unfortunately, as we speak, the supply of the just newly released vaccines under emergency use authorization, there's very limited supply. With vaccine nationalism, you will not be able to end the global pandemic. We are so interconnected nowadays in the world. It would be very difficult.
This is a global pandemic. No country is an island, and therefore inoculating your population is not going to be enough. You would have to have a confidence in the rest of the world getting inoculated. It's absolutely critical to have lots of vaccines available.
Bye. Thanks. This is the last set of samples for this phase. It's a special day because it's been, wow, many months of collecting almost on a daily basis.
Of course, the question is, if we have already licensed vaccines like Pfizer's and eventually Moderna's, then why do we need to continue with this development? One is that there's not enough vaccines around the world, right? So already we're running into shortage. Two is that of all those front runners that have been licensed, we don't know how long immunity would last for. So when do you have to give a booster dose so that we sustain the level of immunity? So there's a lot of unknown that we're still dealing with.
Hi, Ishan.
It will be very foolish for the world now to put all the eggs in one basket. There's no reason to stop right now.
We've come to the end of the phase 1 to human clinical trials for the Arcturus vaccine. And we've gotten all the data, and now I'm on my way to discuss the compiled data with Professor Enyong. There's one random. We have all this data. It'll soon go to regulators. I think we're quite close to a promising vaccine.
I think this is quite a remarkable year. Any medical researcher's dream, of course, is to have your science become reality. So it's particularly very, very satisfying. It's all a team effort, and without this very hardworking and very capable people in the lab, we would not have been able to do this.
It's been almost a year since we started this vaccine development. I've been away from my family, who's in Sri Lanka, and my husband, who's stuck in Korea. I would say that's the hardest, doing all this sort of away from them. But this journey has also had a lot of high points, especially career-wise, and probably it's a rare experience.
When I was young, and when people are young, they fall sick a lot, and they always go to see the doctor. And I was thinking to myself, man, these GPs, they just keep seeing the same cough and cold symptoms, and it seems quite boring. Therefore, I decided not to be a doctor. I was already kind of interested in the path of research, so I kind of stuck to it while others studied medicine and stuff. It's humbling to be able to work on such an important project where the work I do here may actually help to bring this pandemic to an end.
It felt especially meaningful that we were able to do something concrete that could help to maybe solve the problem. At the beginning of the year, in March and April, I hadn't met up with friends, or even I hadn't seen my grandmother in quite a while. They'll call and they'll say hey, how's it going? Are you saving the world yet? kind of thing.
So there's a chance that the vaccine that we make may not be licensed in time for Singaporeans to take. But at the end of the day, we didn't make the vaccine just for Singaporeans. We made the vaccine for the world. There will still be a large part of the world population that will not have access to the vaccine yet. I think as long as we can save one life, it's a job well done.